Hello. Okay. Get it all set up. Say hi if you're joining live today. And if you're watching the replay, type in the comments #replay and just say hi. Just want to make sure I can see all the comments. I'm just going to give a minute or two for people to join if they still would like to. Almost get started. I'm really excited to be talking about this topic. It's one of the topics that I really enjoy and find really interesting. And there's just like every time I talk about this type of topic, I like find new layers that I've never really kind of thought about before. So it's really cool. And by the way, I was going to link one of my lives on emotional recovery, and Facebook deleted it. So I'm very sad about that. But anyway, I'll link the one on self-compassion, because this is essentially like about compassion for others, and self-compassion, obviously, about ourselves. But they're so interrelated that I'll link that. And then also, I did a live on Instagram about emotional labor, which I'll also link in the comments. Yeah, I was really sad about the other one gone. I think like sometimes there's a setting that it like expires at a certain place, but anyway, I'll try and see if I can recover it some way from the internet. But yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on this topic. So hi and welcome. Say hi in the comments if you're joining, whether that's live or in the replay, watching the replay. So I'm Sarah, for those of you who don't know me. I'm a health and recovery coach, and topics like this really, yeah, I just love talking about them especially when it comes to clinicians, because I think really prioritizing our own emotional recovery and emotional health. I like to say that we are emotional athletes, because I think it's really important. It's pretty much what we're doing all day. We're dealing with emotions, whether that's our own, whether that's others, and how we navigate that really influences how fulfilled we are, how energized we are by the work we do, how lit up we feel, and how likely we are to feel like I'm so lucky that I'm doing this work, right? Like the way that we navigate our own like thoughts and emotions really can have a huge impact on how we experience being a clinician. So yeah, I think it's really, really fascinating, and just, yeah, prioritizing that is just, it is something that's so worthwhile, not only for being able to help more or to be of service more, but also for your own fulfillment and happiness and yeah, emotional state. So today's topic is compassion fatigue. And I'm really curious if you wouldn't mind sharing what you kind of think of as compassion fatigue. So whether that's like a definition you have in your mind, or maybe it's just a personal experience, like, yes, I recognize compassion fatigue, I feel X, Y, Z. Like if you have any personal experience or kind of reference of compassion fatigue, I'd love you to share that. I think it's helpful, firstly, just to see that other people are experiencing things that we are also experiencing, but also to see the variety of how people describe compassion fatigue, I feel like is really interesting. And I've heard so many different descriptions of it, even in like articles and research and stuff. People will define it very differently. People will talk about it differently. So yeah, it's like something that is not really like a clear definition of it. And there are so many things that we will talk about kind of interchangeably. And the reason that I think it's really important to differentiate, at least to some extent, between these things is because if we are trying to find a solution, or we're trying to improve something, we want to be improving the right thing. We want to be kind of targeting the right problem, so to speak. So what I mean by that is, if you look at the word compassion fatigue, the implication is that we are exhausted because we are compassionate towards other people. And so, for example, one of the things that we often use interchangeably is feeling emotionally exhausted, or having a lot of emotional labor in our work, or just general exhaustion, like just generally feeling drained. We might say that as compassion fatigue because we're in a caring profession. Whenever we are fatigued, we might just call that compassion fatigue. Or sometimes people use it interchangeably with burnout, or just feeling kind of numb or cynical about the work that we do, or just feeling unfulfilled. So there's all these things, and you can see how those each will demand a slightly different approach and a slightly different like way that we go about like solving for that. So that to me is why it's really important. So that's why I'm going to go a little bit into kind of differentiating these things. And then also going into like, what does it actually mean to be compassionate, and what does it mean to be empathic? Because we sometimes say that compassion fatigue or empathy fatigue, we kind of use those interchangeably as well. So I think that compassion, so let's maybe define compassion, right? So compassion essentially means that you are willing to be present and with someone's pain and suffering, and you're willing to take action, and sometimes very brave action, in the face of that suffering. So it is a recognition of that you're connecting with another human being. So you are human, you're recognizing another human being, and you're saying, all of us, just from the mere fact that we're human, we have struggle, we have strength. So we are connecting from like a point of our shared humanity. It's not like I'm above you and I'm like feeling sorry for you, whatever. We'll talk about kind of what they call empathy or compassion misses, like when we think we're being that, but we're actually not. So it's not like this hierarchy, I'm looking down on you, feeling sorry for you. It's like meeting as equals, as humans, and being willing to be present with that person's suffering. And then empathy, they define as, this is from Brene Brown, by the way, from this book, Atlas of the Heart, awesome book. So a lot of these ideas are from there, and these definitions and stuff. So empathy is essentially a skill set, and it's a skill set we can use to be compassionate with. And it's a skill set that we can learn, and there are different types of empathy. So essentially, when we are talking about like having compassion and being empathic and in a way that's like healthy, what we're really asking is like, how can I connect with my patient? How can I be in service of my patient without taking on their issues as my own, without taking their pain onto me, without taking their suffering onto me? And how can I care and be compassionate without burning out, without having my own health and mental state and emotional state suffer as a result of that? So that's essentially what we're asking. And that is why I think that we actually need more compassion. If we look at like the definition of compassion, I feel like we actually need more of that. But when we are seeing compassion as like extractive, or like I am essentially putting your needs ahead of mine in a way that like it's at a cost to me. So I'm caring for you at a cost to me. If that's how we're seeing compassion, we can see how if we just have more of that, we are going to burn out. We are going to feel emotionally exhausted. So I think differentiating them and being clear on what exactly is compassion and empathy really helps to know what the solution is, because the solution is not caring less or being less compassionate, right? So some of the things that I was saying we use interchangeably. So for example, emotional exhaustion. The main kind of source of that is emotional labor. And I used to think of emotional labor and burnout as the same thing. And I probably saw it as the same thing as compassion fatigue. So kind of all of these were, kind of the same thing to me. Whereas emotional labor is actually the performing of certain emotions that are appropriate, whether you think that's appropriate or the patient deems that appropriate, or for your role in your work it's required, or whatever it is. But you are essentially having to generate a certain emotional state to match what is expected of you. So let's say, for example, you are having to appear positive all the time and optimistic, or a patient is telling you a story that you don't particularly find interesting, but you have to like put on the emotional state of like, I'm listening to them, I'm interested, right? Like I was saying, I'll link the live on emotional labor. But essentially, one of the tools that they said was very helpful for people in jobs where there was a high emotional labor was when they connected that emotional labor to a deeper kind of source. So in other words, they weren't just like faking and like pretending and then being like, feeling like I have to be so inauthentic, I have to be so fake at work, I have to like pretend, all those kinds of narratives, versus from a very deep perspective, like doing this is what I use to like help my patient in a certain way, or it's meaningful because it creates an alliance with the patient, or whatever it is. So as an example, for me, I feel like one of the things that is really exhausting for me is listening to small talk or engaging in small talk. And I think especially the introverts here will really relate to that. But so part of it is like having to almost like pretend that I'm interested in the small talk that's happening, right? Whereas, so if I just see it as that, like, oh, I have to fake this, I have to like pretend to be interested, I have to just listen and listen and listen to something that I don't really want to listen to, etc. Versus me engaging in small talk and listening to like, about their dog or their kid or whatever it is, like that thinking of that as this is what is building a therapeutic alliance with this patient, what's building connection, what's building rapport, even if it's not necessarily the type of discussion I necessarily always want to engage in, especially if it's a lot of patients in a day. So when it's coming from like a deeper place, a deeper purpose or meaning that you're getting from that, it can really help the toll that emotional labor takes on you. So things like emotional exhaustion or labor, as I said, like just feeling generally exhausted, right? Like sometimes you just are completely exhausted, and we'll talk about this more in the workshop, by the way. But just think of like the metaphorical like tank that you have of like resources and energy reserves and stuff. If that's like on so low, you're much less likely to want to like make the effort of taking care of a patient or want to listen to their story or whatever it is. So sometimes it's more just that in general, we just have like a very low tank, and that's one of the areas that you want to be focusing more on, like recovery and rest and resilience. It's a similar concept to that study where like people are less likely to stop and help a stranger when they're in a rush. Like that person's personality didn't change. They're just in a rush versus not in a rush. And in the one case, when they are not in a rush, they stop to help someone that's in need. And in the other one, the other kind of example, it's the exact same person, but now they're in a rush and someone needs help, and they either didn't even like notice that person or they just kind of go past it. So things like being in a rush, always feeling like we don't have time, things like just being exhausted, all that stuff, like in a more general sense, can manifest in like feeling emotionally exhausted or feeling like we are fatigued from caring for people. So, and then burnout is like a specific set of symptoms, and compassion fatigue we might kind of talk about as one of those things, but again, it's also like important to differentiate, because generally one of the hallmarks of burnout is emotional and physical exhaustion. And that may or may not come from how you care for people or how you, what you see as like being compassionate towards people. So where was I? Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around my notes a little bit. So one of the things that, so let's say we're answering that question, right? How can I take care of people? How can I be in connection with them and in service to them, service of them, I mean, in service to them, who is struggling or suffering or in pain, without taking on the issues onto myself? How can I not take on their suffering onto myself? So that was the kind of like general question that Brené Brown outlined. And she said what they found in the research is that the answer is a combination of compassion and cognitive empathy. So empathy has two different types. There's one that is cognitive empathy, which means I intellectually understand, like I mentalize my empathy and my understanding of what you're going through. And then there's affective empathy, which means I take on, essentially like I feel with you. And she was just saying that cognitive empathy is actually more helpful if we're trying to connect with someone without taking on their problems as our own. So if you just think about like how helpful it is, right? If I am suffering and I'm in pain, if you now take on my pain and you are suffering to like the extent that I am, that's not really helpful to me. So you might think of it as like, it's because I care so much, I'm like taking on their emotional pain. But if you're really trying to connect with them and help them without like taking that on, or without like burning out or having that be over the long term detrimental to you, but even just to be helpful to that person, you won't take it on as like, I'm feeling what you're feeling. So compassion plus cognitive empathy, so understanding like mentally how that person is feeling. And it doesn't need to be, in fact, usually it's not, but you don't need to understand exactly, you don't have to have gone through what they're going through. It's like the general emotion. So let's say like joy or heartbreak, or the idea of like feeling invisible or not being seen. We can all have references in our lives that we can understand that emotional state through. We don't have to necessarily have gone through the exact same situation as that person. So mentally understanding, like having a little like reference of how that feels, plus the compassion, plus being willing to be present with them and be with them in their suffering. So I'm going to go through the misses first, and then we'll go back to some tools. But there's this concept that she talks about. I think it's actually from a Buddhist teacher that she gets it from, but anyway, she talks about it in her book, Brené Brown. And she talks about the concept of near enemies. So if you think of something like, trying to think of like an obvious thing that has nothing to do with this, obvious example. Anyway, I'll come back to that. But let's say in this, so a near enemy, the idea of a near enemy is that it looks kind of like the thing that you're going for, but it's actually in opposition to it. It's actually not helpful. And let me just actually get an example of it so I can. Oh, man. Okay, anyway. So I'm going to attempt to explain this without an example because my head is not like referencing one for me. So essentially, like if we are, let's say, trying to, in this example, we're trying to be compassionate or we're trying to be empathic. A near enemy is something that looks kind of like compassion or looks kind of like empathy, but actually is in opposition to it or undermining it. And the reason why it's called a near enemy and not a far enemy would be something that's very obviously not like it, very obviously not that thing. So when you are like dismissive of someone's pain, like you don't care at all, you're not willing to listen to what is happening for them, like it's very obvious that you're not being compassionate or empathic. But sometimes it looks like you are, but you are actually not. So that's why they called it a near enemy. It's like an enemy of it, but it's near. Hope that was clear. So in this example of like compassion and empathy, the near enemies, essentially things that look like compassion and empathy, but aren't. So what she also calls these are like empathy misses. So we're shooting for empathy or compassion and we're missing, right? And one of them is, I've just kind of picked a few that are more relevant to like our role, but there are quite a few. So it would be something like pity or sympathy. So I feel sorry for you. And it's kind of like I was referencing earlier, it has this like implied hierarchy, like I'm here, I am helping you, I'm fixing you from up here, and you are like, you know, inferior in some way. And it creates a kind of distance, right? It's like, I feel sorry for you from over here. So I'm not truly like willing to connect with you and be vulnerable with you. I'm keeping a safe distance. And sometimes it's almost like this, like, I don't really understand what you're going through, but I do feel sorry for you. Like, that doesn't happen in my world. That doesn't happen in my life. I don't really get it, but I feel sorry for you, Like that's that kind of feeling. And then things like, the reason that I picked that one is like, I think sometimes we have this like hierarchy of like, I'm the person fixing, I'm the person that's going to help you, and I know what's best for you, and I'm going to be like the hero in the story, even if we're not specifically thinking of it like that, right? That is like pity or sympathy or like advice giving, fixing. And then despair is similar to the idea that we're taking on that person's emotion and that person's suffering. And this is actually where Brene Brown says, in some sense, there is actually no such thing as compassion fatigue. When we are talking about compassion fatigue, as in we are so like exhausted and burnt out from helping people, she says actually what is usually happening is that the provider is focused on their own distress. So they actually are not focusing their attention on the person's suffering and the person's what the person is going through. They're focusing on how distressed they are by that person's suffering. So she says a more accurate term would actually be empathic distress fatigue. You focus on your own distress rather than the patient. So this is like despair and anguish and like really suffering because of what the other person is going through. There's also essentially secondary trauma, which means like if you are witnessing trauma so often, especially if you work in like emergency department or something like that, where you have a lot of like traumatic events happening. Hats off to you, by the way. I think you're amazing. But any sort of situation where you're having to see that a lot, you can experience secondary trauma, and that can make you very numb to things happening. It can have you be very distressed. It can be emotionally exhausting, etc. And that's another thing we want to distinguish. That is something separate from being burnt out or emotionally exhausted because you're just caring for people. And then another near enemy is like judgment. So like if a patient, for example, is they want to get out of pain, right? And you say, okay, I'm going to do XYZ, and then this is an exercise for you to do at home. And the patient comes back and they didn't do the exercise. And the judgment is like, well, you just don't care about your health. Like, I'm having to do this and you don't care. You're not willing to meet me and actually like do the work, or in some sense like you deserve the fact that you're not getting better because you aren't willing to do the work, like some sort of like judgment about their character, or their like deservingness of what is happening. And I didn't really have like a category to put this into, but one of the things that I've really noticed, and this is like for myself, I'm not like calling people out, but I have seen it in other practitioners as well. It's like there's a certain kind of emotional labor that we have when we are essentially trying to like drag our patients to where we think they should go. Like we're saying, like, yeah, there's like this convincing, like I need to take you to this fixed place, or this like where you helped or where things are better and you don't want to go, or you are like not doing enough, so I have to like pull you there, I have to like drag you there. And I remember there was this post on a Facebook group of clinicians, and the one guy was saying, was like talking about a story. His daughter has a chronic illness, and so he's at the hospital quite a lot, and he kind of gets to know the nurses and stuff. And there was a younger nurse and an older nurse, and the one day he went there and the younger nurse wasn't there anymore, and he was chatting to the older nurse and asking, you know, where this younger nurse was, and she said no, she'd quit the day before. She was really distressed. I think, you know, something had happened with the patient. Not sure if they like passed away or something, anyway, but essentially like something really distressing had happened. And this younger nurse had quit. And the guy was very curious because obviously he works in healthcare as well. And he was just saying, you know, what do you think is like the difference? Because I mean, she's an older nurse. She had been working there for like decades. And he was saying, you know, you must have seen that kind of stuff as well. Like, what do you feel is like the difference between someone who kind of reacts like the younger nurse did and this older nurse? And the older nurse was just saying that in her experience, what she had seen is that when nurses had this idea that they're doing the work that they're doing because they want to save lives or help people. She said when they have that kind of viewpoint, what happens is if someone is not helped or if someone is not saved or something is like kind of going against what they think the purpose of them doing that work is, they have so much distress. And when she's thinking about it, she's saying, what I see as my job is not to help people or save lives. My job is to show up as best as I can and to meet the other person where they are and help them as much as I can in that like relationship, wherever they are and wherever she is, helping as much as she can in that. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes things happen that are outside her control. But because she's seeing her like role as that, she has a much less chance of being so distressed when something bad happens. So it's not that she doesn't care as much as the other person or that she is less compassionate, she's less empathic, none of that. It's like the way that we make sense of these things and the way that we approach our work and how we see our role can really influence how much we are affected by these things or how we are affected. And there's a quote by Anne Lamott. She's a writer. And this quote has always kind of stuck with me because it's something that I really struggled with. But anyway, the quote is, "Help is the sunny side of control." And essentially saying like, sometimes we help as a form of control, as a form of like, if you are helped by me, I feel validated. I feel like a good person. I feel like a good clinician. I feel like, you know, my purpose of my work is being met. So you're almost like needing that person to be helped by you, to be grateful for what you do, for all those things, in order for you to feel like you have some sort of control and you have validation and etc. So it's just something to think about. For some of you that might resonate, for some not. But it's just a point that I thought I would add because it's something that I've really kind of, that's been the biggest shift for me, is like from there to like, or from in general, these like near enemies of compassion to true compassion and true connection and true vulnerability. And I think one of the like trends with all of these things, all of these near enemies, is that we actually end up making it more about ourselves, which is like so ironic because we think the problem is like we are caring too much for others and we're giving too much to others. But essentially, when we are doing the near enemies of compassion, we actually end up focusing on ourselves, on our own distress, on our own mental like whirlwinds and our like, and we actually are less able to be present with that patient and really genuinely like hear what they're saying and like connect with the fact that they are suffering and like without like filtering it through all of our stuff, right? So anyway, I am going to wrap up with the some of the like tools. This is from Theresa Weissman. She studies empathy in helping professions. And then the fifth one is from Kirsten Neff, which is the same lady that researches and writes about self-compassion, which you can go watch the one on self-compassion. The first one is perspective taking. So that's similar to the cognitive empathy, which is like thinking about the perspective, like what does that concept mean for the patient? What does it mean for them to not be better? Or what does it mean for them to be frustrated? The perspective taking of trying to see like, what is that experience like for that person? One of the things that Brene Brown talks about as well is that we need to stop thinking about empathy as walking in someone else's shoes, because we can't walk in their shoes, and because walking in their shoes is like, I'm going to experience what they're experiencing, right? We need to see it more as, I need to listen to them telling me about what it's like to walk in their shoes, and I need to believe them, even if it doesn't match my own personal experiences. So it's like a perspective taking, like understanding what does it mean to them? How do they see it? How do they experience it? The second one is staying out of judgment. So like I sort of touched on earlier, you're just listening to them. You're just being present with what they're telling you, instead of like filtering it through like judgments about their character, judgments about what they should have done, what they shouldn't have done, etc. And then recognizing emotion. So this is that idea of like, I'm not necessarily trying to access a memory of exactly what you experienced, but I'm trying to access the emotion, and I'm trying to access something within me that identifies and connects with that emotion. And you can clarify that. You can ask questions, again, like understanding how they are actually feeling, instead of just assuming that they felt the same way that you did when you had a similar experience, right? And then communicating our understanding. Sometimes we're just saying like, yeah, that's really hard. Like, it's really frustrating when you're not getting better, or, you know, like that must be incredibly tough. And sometimes it's detailed, like sometimes we're communicating the fact that we understand through our own story, but realizing that we're doing that in order to communicate that, not just like, that's another near enemy. It's like, no, but wait, you haven't heard my story. One-upping. I think that's bad. Like, you should hear about my other patients, right? And then the last one is from Kirsten Neff, which is practicing mindfulness, which is essentially that practice of not pushing away the emotion because it's uncomfortable for you, but you're able to feel it and you're able to move through it. And I like that sort of saying of, instead of, let me just get straight, like when someone is like essentially in the dark, that you're willing to sit with them in the dark instead of trying to turn on the light because you feel uncomfortable in the dark, right? You're not trying to like hide it or fix it. You're trying to be willing to be uncomfortable and experience the discomfort of feeling that, and being present with the fact that they are suffering and they are uncomfortable. And then you are helping in any way you can, right? Part of compassion is taking brave action. It's not always just like passive, but it's taking action with the understanding of what they really need from you, and not just, this is how I'm going to fix it. This is how I'm going to kind of get rid of this discomfort, right? Okay, cool. So I hope you found that helpful. Let me know kind of your experiences with this, your thoughts on this, which things like resonate with you and that you've experienced, and where you maybe sometimes have thought of compassion fatigue as something else, or like where you've thought of things as kind of the same thing. Yeah, I'd really be really interested to know. And if you want to join the workshop, which is all about essentially like making sure that we are giving from a full cup or a full tank, we're going to go into that. That is at the end of this month. I will link it in the comments. It's a free workshop, it's online, and the replays will be in this group. So you can watch it afterwards as well. But if you do join live, I'm going to kind of do like a little draw thing with everyone that joined live, and I'll be giving away one of my intensive coaching sessions, which is essentially 4 hours of coaching, whether that's kind of in one go, obviously with breaks, or split over 2 days. And it really dives into like 1 or 2 areas where you really feel like you need the most help. And we really dive deep into those areas and we coach on that. So I'd love to see you at the workshop, and have a great Sunday. I'll chat to you guys soon.